I did. I got your email.
Yeah, I'm so mad.
So
So mad.
just hang out for a minute after class. Tell me what happened in as much detail as you can, and I will get in touch with Dr. Dave and see what happened there and why the person. Try to find out why the person did.
Yeah, I told my coach about it because I did it at practice yesterday, and she told me just to like tell you obviously, and then just go in person.
Yeah, going in person won't make much difference because they're not taking walk-ins.
Oh, okay.
But I'll talk to Dr. Dave and I'll figure out what happened.
That didn't happen to me, but I only have like so much time in my day because I have practice.
Sure. Yeah.
I played in position, so I have to go to practice early. So
right.
I'm not trying to like make an appointment and then go there and then nobody's there.
Right, and then your time just gets wasted. Yeah. So let me talk to Dr. Dave and I'll see what happened. Like, I'm sure that was probably a one-time misunderstanding. I hope it was. But
I looked at it, they only had like one time available that I could even go, and I had to take time off of work just to keep going.
Yeah, and this is the problem with the appointments only model too, is that it's just like they don't have enough tutors to cover what we actually need on campus, and they can't schedule enough blocks of time for when people are actually available. So yeah, I think they should go back to doing walk-ins, but I don't run the writing center.
You should.
That's up to Dr. Yeah, I don't want that. I don't want that extra piece of responsibility.
You should be a tutor.
Actually, what?
You should be a tutor.
All right. So everybody knows that paper one is due tonight, right? Not yesterday. So I got a couple of alarmed emails yesterday about Georgia View giving you a notification.
Yeah.
Just keep one thing in mind, right? That if Georgia View is telling you to turn in the paper earlier than I told you to do it, right? Would it be fair for me to penalize you for turning it in late? Absolutely not, right? And I would agree. So I'm trying here to be, so just assume that I'm trying to be fair. And that if Georgia View tells you something different from what I'm telling you, just go with what I told you, right? Because I'm not going to hold you responsible for what a piece of software is telling you to do. Right? Georgia View doesn't have a brain; it doesn't think. If it does tell you to do something, it's probably because I did something wrong in it. So just go with what I tell you, and I'll adjust the software accordingly. For next time, you're reading the Seneca essay on liberal and vocational studies. And you're going to give me 3 vocab words for that. But today we are talking about Plato and his representation of Socrates' conversation with Gorgias. So here's how I want to go about things today, right? The handout that I'm giving you is the only surviving writing of Gorgias himself, right? So most of what we know about Gorgias and the school of thinkers that he belonged to is written by people like Plato who were opposed to them. So this piece can give us some notion of what Gorgias himself actually thought and tried to put into practice. So the thing I'm ultimately going to want you to do here is break up into, how many of us are there? Of course, there's an odd number of us. Damn it. All right, well, you're going to break up into one group of 3 and one group of 2. Because that's what we got to work with. And each group member is going to take on one of the following roles. Right? One person's going to be the scribe. You're going to write stuff down, take notes. Another person is going to be the spokesperson. You're going to deliver the group's findings. And the third person, if you have one, will be the advocatus diaboli. Can anybody translate the Latin there? Can anybody guess what that means?
Advocate?
Okay, advocate, is the first. And diaboli, think about that one for a minute.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
So advocatus diaboli in Latin means devil's advocate.
Oh, that makes sense.
So one person in the group, if you have enough people for this, is going to look for counter arguments, right? So what your group is trying to decide is whether or not Gorgias is guilty of teaching dangerous doctrines and should thus be exiled from Athens. So the devil's advocate is going to be going against what the rest of the group decides, right? And looking for evidence to the contrary.
So what do you do if there's 2 people?
If there's 2 people, then you can both help with that.
Okay.
Sorry. So what you're going to do is use the 2 texts I provided with you to make your determination. You're going to cite specific evidence from both pieces, right, to decide whether or not Gorgias is guilty or innocent. But the first thing we're going to do, because you haven't encountered this before, right? We're just going to read this together out loud. It's a short piece. It shouldn't take more than 10 to 15 minutes for all of us together to read it out loud. So it's called the Encomium of Helen. Encomium in Greek means a speech in praise of. So this is a speech in praise of Helen of Troy. So what, if anything, do you all know? What if anything do you all know about Helen of Troy, or about the Trojan War?
I've watched the movie Troy.
Okay, that'll give you some information, probably not good information.
Wasn't there a horse?
Like the Trojan horse.
There is a horse at the end of it. Yeah, there's a wooden horse that the
They
Greeks
come and like
used
attack
yeah.
them.
Yeah. The Greeks use the horse as a trick, right? They hide inside of it. And when the Trojans bring the horse into the city, they
Mhm.
funnel forth and kill everybody. Yeah. But the war is fought over a woman named Helen, reportedly the most beautiful woman in the world, who was married to King Menelaus of Sparta, but was either seduced or abducted by a Trojan prince, whose name is given as either Paris or Alexander.
Why Paris or Alexander? Like, why is it not just? Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's
was curious.
yeah, the character is just called by both names.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I only point this out because they refer to the same person. So when you see either of those names, it's referring to the same character.
I was curious.
So Helen is usually blamed for being the cause of a war that led to the death of a lot of Greek heroes and to the destruction of the Trojan civilization entirely, right? So what Gorgias was best known for, the skill that he was sought out for, was being able to take apparently unpopular or weak positions and argue effectively for them, right? So this is an example of that here. What he's trying to do is he's trying to take this character from Greek mythology, from Greek literature, who is reviled, and speak in praise of her and explain why she shouldn't be blamed for the Trojan War, right? So can I get a volunteer to start reading from the beginning of the Encomium, what is becoming to a city is manpower.
Wait, what?
It's after the biographical note.
Oh.
What is becoming to a city of manpower, to body beauty, to soul, to a soul wisdom, to an action virtue, to a speech truth, and the opposites of these are unbecoming. Man and woman, speech, indeed, and city and object should be honored with praise, if praiseworthy, and incur blame, if unworthy. For it is an equal error or mistake to blame the praisable and to praise the blamable. It is the duty of one and the same man both to speak the needful rightly and to refute. The unrightful spoken thus, it is right to refute. Those who rebuke Helen, a woman about whom the testimony of inspired poets has become univocal, and unanimous, as had the ill omen of her name, which has become a reminder of misfortunes. For my part, by introducing some reason into my speech, I wish to free the accused of blame, and having reproved her detractors as
Prevaricators, liars.
prevaricators, and proved the truth to free her from the ignorance.
Okay, keep going. Read one more paragraph.
Now it is not unclear, not even to a few, that in nature and in blood the woman who is the subject of this speech is preeminent among permanent men and women. For it is clear that her mother and Leda and her father was in fact a god, Zeus, and allegedly a mortal.
Tindarius.
I'm not even sure. Of whom the former was shown to be her father, because he was, and the latter was disproved because he was said to be. And the one was the most powerful of men, and the other the Lord of all.
Okay, Rendario, can you pick it up from born from such stock?
Born from such stock, she had godlike beauty, which taking and not mistaking, she kept. In many did she work much, desire for her love, and her one body was the cause of bringing together many bodies of men, thinking great thoughts for great hopes, of whom some had greatness of wealth, some the glory of ancient nobility, some the vigor of personal
Agility, yes.
agility,
Mhm.
some command of acquired knowledge, and all came because of a passion which loved to conquer, and love of honor which was unconquered. Who it was, and why, and how he sailed away, taking Helen as his love, I shall not say, to tell the knowing what they know, shows it is right, but brings no delight. Having now gone beyond the times once set for my speech, I shall go on to the beginning of my future speech, and I shall set forth the cause through which it was likely that Helen's voyage to Troy should take place. For either by will of faith and decision of the gods and vote of necessity did she do what she did, or by force reduced, or by words seduced, or by love possessed. Now if through the first it is right for the responsible one to be held responsible, for God's predetermination cannot be hindered by human premeditation. For it is the nature of things not for the strong to be hindered by the weak, but for the weaker to be ruled and drawn by the stronger, and for the stronger to lead and the weaker to follow. God is a stronger force than man in might and in wit and in other ways. If then one must place blame on fate, and on a God one must free Helen from disgrace.
Okay, Hannah, can you pick it up from there, but if she was raped by violence?
But if she was raped by violence and illegality, assaulted and unjustly insulted, it is clear that the raper, as the insulter, did the wronging, and the raped, as the insulted, did the suffering. It is right then for the barbarian who undertook the barbaric undertaking in the word and law and deed to meet with blame in word, exclusion in law, and punishment in deed. And surely it is proper for a woman raped and robbed of her country and deprived of her friends to be pitied rather than
Pilloried, subject to public ridicule.
he did the dread deeds, she suffered them. It is just therefore to pity her, but to hate him. But if the speech which persuaded her and deceived her heart, not even to this is it difficult to make an answer, and to banish blame as follows. Speech is a powerful word, by which means of the finest and most invisible body affects the divinest words, and can stop fear and banish grief, and create joy and nurture pity. I shall show how this is the case, since it is necessary to offer proof to the opinion of my hearers. I both deem and define all poetry as speech with meter. Fearful shudderings and tearful pity and grievous longing come upon its hearers, and that the actions and physical sufferings of others in good fortunes and in evil fortunes, though the agency of words, the soul is wont to experience the suffering of its own. But come, I shall turn from one argument to another. Sacred incantations sung with words of bearers of pleasure and banishers of pain, for merging with opinion in the soul, and the power of the incantation is wont to beguile it and persuade it and alter it to witchcraft. There have been discovered two arts of witchcraft and magic. One consists of errors of soul, and the other of deceptions of opinion.
Okay, thank you. Carmen, can you pick it up from all who have and do persuade people of things?
All who have and do persuade people of things do so by molding a false argument. For if all men on all subjects had both memory of things past and awareness of things present and foreknowledge of the future, speech would not be similar. Since as things are now, it is not easy for them to recall the past, nor to consider the present, nor to predict the future. So that on most subjects most men take opinion as counsel to their soul. But since opinion is slippery and insecure, it casts those employing it into slippery and insecure successes. What cause then prevents the conclusion that Helen, similarly, against her will, might have come under the influence of speech, just as if ravished by the force of the mighty. For it was possible to see how the force of persuasion prevails. Persuasion has the form of necessity, but it does not have the same power. For speech constrained the soul, persuading it which is persuaded, both to believe the things said and to approve the things done. The persuader, like a constrainer, does the wrong, and the persuaded, like a constraint in speech, is wrongly charged. To understand that persuasion, when added to speech, is wont also to impress the soul as it wishes, one must study first the words of astronomers, who substitute an opinion for opinion, taking away one but creating another, make what is incredible and unclear seem true to the eyes of opinion. Then second, logically necessary debates in which a single speech, written with art but not spoken with truth, bends a great crowd and persuades. And third, the verbal disputes of philosophers, in which the swiftness of thought is also shown, making the belief in an opinion subject to easy change. The effect of speech upon the condition of the soul is comparable to the power of drugs over the nature of bodies. For just as different drugs dispel different secretions from the body, and some bring an end to disease and others to life, so also in this case of speeches, some distress, others delight, some cause fear, others make the hearers bold, and some drug and bewitch the soul, which a kind of evil persuasion.
Thank you, Carmen. Trinity, can you start from it has been explained?
It has been explained that if she was persuaded by speech, she did not do wrong, but was unfortunate. I shall discuss the fourth cause in a fourth passage. For it was love which did all these things. There will be no difficulty in escaping the charge of the sin which is alleged to have taken place. For the things we see do not have the nature which we wish them to have, but the nature which each actually has. Through sight, the soul receives an impression even in its inner features. With belligerents, when belligerents in war buckle on their warlike accoutrements with bronze and steel, some designed for defense, others for offense. If the sight sees this immediately, it is alarmed, and it alarms the soul, so that often men flee stricken from future danger, as though it were present. For strong as it is the habit of obedience to law, it is ejected by fear resulting from sight, which becoming to man causes him to be indifferent both to what is judged honorable because of the law, and to advantage to be deprived from victory. It has happened that people, after having seen frightened sights, have also lost presence of mind for the presence of the moment. In this way, fear extinguishes and excludes thought, and many have fallen victim to useless labor and dread diseases and hardly curable madness. In this way, the sight engraves upon the mind images of things which have been seen, and many frightened impressions linger, and what lingers is exactly analogous to what is spoken. Moreover, whenever pictures perfectly create single figures and form many colors and figures, they delight the sight, while the creation of establishes the production of works and art furnish a pleasant sight to the eyes. This is natural for the sight to grieve for some things and to long for others, and much love and desire for many objects and figures is engraved in many men. Therefore the eye of Helen, pleased by the figure of Alexander, presented to her soul eager desire and consent of love. What wonder, if, being a god, love has the divine power of gods, how could be a lesser being reject and refuse it? But if it is disease of human origin and fault of the soul, it has not been blamed as a sin, but regarded as an affliction. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For she came, and she did come, caught in the net of fate, not by the plans of the mind, and by the constraints of love, not by the devices of art.
You've read long enough. It's okay.
Okay.
How then can one regard blame of Helen as just, since she is utterly acquitted of all charge, whether she did what she did through falling in love, or persuaded by speech, or ravished by force, or constrained by divine constraint? I have by means of speech removed disgrace from a woman. I have observed the procedure which I set up at the beginning of the speech. I have tried to end the injustice of blame and the ignorance of opinion. I wish to write a speech which would be a praise of Helen and a diversion to myself. Okay, so let's, for a minute before we start in with this, just make sure everybody understands what Gorgias is doing here, right? So, like, on the one hand, right, the obvious argument is about whether or not Helen of Troy should be blamed for the Trojan War, right? But what's he actually making an argument about?
Wait, we can write on this, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. You can absolutely take notes on that, yeah.
If she actually fell in love with him, or if it was by force?
Okay, yeah, he mentions the possibility of force, right? And if she was forced to go with him, then there's no blame to her there, right? But what's the thing he actually spends most of his time talking about?
Oh, like love and how she couldn't help it because if they fell in love, it was like so strong she could say no to it.
He brings up love at the end, right? And perhaps because Paris was handsome, she went with him, right? But what the big chunk in the middle? What's he talking about the power of? And think about what his job is. Think about what his profession is. Right, Gorgias is a teacher of rhetoric, right? He's a teacher of speech and persuasion. So much of this speech that's supposed to be in praise of Helen, right? If we look at the very long middle paragraph, is actually about the power of speech, right? The things that speech can drive people to do, both the good things and the bad things, right? So this is where you should be focusing your attention, right? On what Gorgias says about the powers of speech and the kinds of things he compares it to, as you are thinking about whether or not he should be exiled. Now, Plato, if we look at the Gorgias, right? The imaginary dialogue between Plato's teacher Socrates and Gorgias, Plato would probably argue, that Gorgias should be kicked out of Athens. But I want you all to make this determination based on the evidence presented in both of these pieces, right? So go ahead and break yourselves up into groups. One group of 3, one group of 2. And go ahead and begin. So each group is going to make its own determination, right? You'll each present what you find around the end of class, and then we'll take a vote together to decide whether or not to convict Gorgias.
What do you mean convict?
Well, whether or not he's guilty.
The scribe is the person that writes down the stuff, right?
Yep.
What do you want to do?
Oh, right. What is that?
So we have whatever the group decides, right? When the group decides Gorgias is guilty, say, then she needs to try to find counter evidence to make sure that you have the strongest argument you can. Well, this suggests he's not. How do we explain that, right?
Okay, so basically, so everything wrong, basically that. Backing that up.
We're comparing this with what we read.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're using both to try to make a determination about whether or not Gorgias is dangerous to the state.
Whether, yeah. To see if like he's accused of innocent or guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I'll speak.
No, I'm speaking.
Okay. What do you want to write? I don't know. We're getting out the butt.
So Georgia, whatever. It's been accused of Plato, doctrines representing or charged with.
So what you probably want to do here, right, is try to like what does Plato think Gorgias believes? What does Plato think Gorgias teaches, right? And how does it compare with what Gorgias actually says in his own piece here?
That like her opinion is right, like it doesn't matter if it's actually right or wrong, or, you know, the law or whatever. Like,
Okay, gosh, okay.
if you could persuade somebody to do it, then it's like, right, it doesn't matter if it's actually right or wrong, or against the law or whatever.
Should he be with that? So like right that.
I mean, I feel like it would, because
Gorgias has been
I could
accused by
personally
Plato
do
of promoting doctrines.
wrong is right,
Should he
like,
be- is he
it
guilty
sounds
or not
articulated, that you want to
Promoting
do wrong,
doctrines.
and it's actually right, you know, or like the law or whatever.
Okay, and then whose fault would Gorgias say is whatever happens as a result? Is it the fault of the person who was persuaded and did the thing, or the fault of the
No.
person who persuaded him to do it?
The person who persuaded them, because like you said about Helen, like it's not her fault if she like fell in love or was persuaded or blah blah blah.
Yeah,
Because
this smooth talking guy sails in from Troy, right?
Yeah.
And convinces her to go.
Yeah, and it's not at all
Yeah.
her fault, so she shouldn't be blamed, so that's like his whole argument.
So. He didn't say provide your determinations of
What do you think? Do you think
So you're asking if we think
Not guilty.
how do you say his name?
Gorgias.
Please?
Mhm.
But like if
Are we saying like if he's
way
guilty
right
of
is
like?
right or wrong,
Go ahead.
Like I don't get how
get why we're focused on he's innocent or guilty and not the Paris Alexander.
Well, because the Paris Alexander Helen thing is just an example, right? So what the
His
important
way of arguing is right or wrong.
yeah, the important part is the other part, like what he has to say about the powers of speech, right?
Yeah.
So is he teaching things to people about speech and about what you can do with speech that are dangerous?
Yes. Or-
Honestly, I'm kind of forgot, but it'll come back. Good Lord.
Remember to make use of both pieces. Before you decide which side you're trying to argue, right, make sure you've weighed the evidence. Because if you were on trial for something and the jury had already decided you were innocent or guilty, right?
Okay, so from both pieces, what evidence did you find that makes him guilty? Oh my God.
What do you mean, oh my God?
I don't think he should be guilty for the description because she still has, like, whether she has to do it or not. Like, she still has a choice.
Does she?
Yes, like how, like, if like a guy's sitting right here and he's like, cuts my road, da da da, and tells me all this stuff.
Okay, well, this is the
he can't
21st
really-
century, though. Things are different back then.
Not that different.
Have a point. You still have, you have an option.
So you're saying
You
that
can
she
be like,
could have
yeah,
had her
I'm
own
gonna go to bed
opinion?
with you, or you can be like, yeah, I'm not.
Well, what I'm saying doesn't really matter, right? What matters is what you're getting from Plato and from Gorgias, right? Now Gorgias is arguing that she should not be held responsible for what she did, right? But again, like remember that Gorgias's real argument here isn't really about Helen, right? It's about the power of speech. So try to focus more of your attention on that part of it, and what Gorgias thinks speech is able to do, and whether that presents a danger or not.
Oh, so you're saying like, since like, he uses speech to like persuade, and it says like deceive your heart.
Yeah.
He's trying to use speech to say that that's how.
Yeah, and think about like if you look at like what Gorgias says both in his own piece and in the Plato piece, right? Look at all the things that he says speech can do, right? And think about, whether those things are like, morally good, morally bad, or morally neutral.
Because when he's talking.
When we say he, that's Paris and Alexander, right?
Gorgias. We're talking about Gorgias.
I thought that was she.
Yeah, so.
Now, Gorgias is a man.
Oh, wow. I'm so lost.
Helen has to go.
Oh, okay, that's it.
That is not dangerous. Okay, good, because you're supposed to argue against that, so that's good.
Yeah.
And what? Good for you. She got it.
How are we doing here?
Guys, I need a new partner. She literally was like, it's Paris and Alexander, and I'm like, huh? And I was like, no. And then she got me confused over here, and she's like, And I literally looked at her and I'm like, I'm so lost.
What you are trying to determine has really nothing to do directly with Helen or with Paris or Alexander, right?
It's about speech.
Exactly. It's about speech, and it's about the things that Gorgias teaches, right? Are the things that Gorgias teaches dangerous? Do they potentially undermine the state, right?
Well, he does say that, like when he says that definition essentially
I don't feel like I have really good backing up for what I'm saying, but I just.
If these kinds of questions were easy to answer, right, that wouldn't require very much thought.
It's making my brain hurt.
Good. That means it's working. It means it's doing something.
He doesn't do stuff anymore. So when he's like, speech is like a powerful word, he's saying that like, he's like saying that speech is like,
So he's basically saying like.
I know what I want to say, but like I can't
So say it.
Okay, so think about the other things he compared speech to, right?
Our love, so he did something.
And if there's a pattern there.
Feel a
Says
certain
criminal
way because he did
false
something.
argument.
It's not your fault because that's not your fault. And so, I feel like that's wrong. Like you can't just, want the candy bar, so steal it. That
There are
makes
two
it
other things in that
right,
paragraph
because
he
I want
compares
stuff like
speech to,
that.
right? Two other analogies
Like
he
if you
uses.
like, she was in love, so it's not her fault that she ran away with him, or she was persuaded, so it's not her fault that she ran away with him.
to recall the past, not to consider present, not to predict the future. Or somewhere where it says persuasion has the form of necessity, but it does not have the same power for speech constrained, the soul persuading it, which it persuaded, both to believe the things said and to approve the things done.
Not quite. If we look at verse 10 here, right? Just go through that.
Yeah.
That'll be the first other thing he's comparing.
So he literally just saying that compared to persuading somebody, and if you persuade them, then it's not wrong for them to do it. And if it turns out that they were wrong, then it would be his fault for persuading them. But them doing the wrong thing.
It's somewhere where it says
They're not
discovered two
wrong,
arts of
they're
witchcraft, one and magic, one
Yeah.
of errors of
That's not
soul,
right.
and the other is deception.
Yeah, so speech is like magic or witchcraft, right?
Wrong. It's still wrong.
And if we look
You're not.
at the end of the paragraph, starting with verse 14 here.
The power of drugs over the natures of body.
Mhm.
Maybe just doesn't care.
So how are a powerful lord and magic and drugs alike?
You said what?
What did you say?
How are a powerful lord and magic and drugs alike? What do these three things have in common in relation to, say, you?
Addiction.
Well, that would really only be the third thing, right? That would really only be the third thing.
I would say that like, it's like some sort of like controlling aspect.
Yes, exactly.
You know what I mean, like,
Yeah. You were going in the right direction there, right? But it was a
Something
little,
transformative.
yeah, but it was a little too specific.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with it.
Basically saying like,
If y'all are addicted to witchcraft, that's no business of mine.
oh no.
He said, oh no.
I'm not addicted to any of those.
It's basically saying that whatever, if the law says something, it wouldn't necessarily matter if you can persuade them that it's not in effect. Like if you can persuade them otherwise, then who cares about what the law says or what someone else says? That if you can persuade them to do something else, then they're right.
Basically that he can use his words to control.
Yeah.
Hey, quit stealing it.
We can hear you.
So I'm gonna suggest also that y'all take a look at at Gorgias' speech at the bottom of page 128 and what he says there. That's where you are now? Okay, yeah. And see if there's anything kind of maybe morally questionable about what he's arguing there. And then if you continue on with that to what he says about teachers on the following page.
Are you talking about what she asked, like the rhetorical?
What does he mean, like, what is a rhetorician,
A
like?
rhetorician?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, okay, so a rhetorician is a kind of professional
Medical stuff.
speaker.
What's going on?
Right. So a rhetorician is someone who is a professional kind of speaker and writer who is primarily concerned with persuasion.
Ooh.
Right. So the art Gorgias teaches, the thing that he agrees to, as Socrates is trying to whittle him down to a definition, right? Is that that rhetoric is the art that is specifically concerned with verbal persuasion, right?
So he compares the rhetorician and the physician because it says at the bottom that the physician would have no chance because he's persuaded into, right?
Yeah. So
Right.
yeah. So
Right. I don't need you.
So the situation here, that he describes here is you've got two guys who are running for the position of state physician, right? One of them is an actual doctor. The other is a rhetorician, right? Someone who can speak well and persuasively, but who knows fuck all about medicine. Right? Which of these two people is Gorgias saying would have a better chance of getting elected? The rhetorician would, right? Despite the fact that he doesn't know anything about medicine.
Because he's good at
Yeah.
Sounds like what we do these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some beautiful things that
No, I'm
that's
going to see it.
There's a
She's probably gonna sound
So
silly.
in the case, like, if it doesn't matter if you have any experience, or like, the doctor saying like, you're not actually a doctor, he's just good at persuading people.
I'm 20
So therefore he wins, and that's not just, I guess, or right, I don't know. Not just, yeah. Duh.
I wrote
what she said.
You do you. Okay, wait.
ought not therefore to strike established standards for him. So it's like if these are the people that, if he's saying what he's saying to the people that is on the side, then basically that he wouldn't like he wouldn't mind, but like
I mean, he's not like saying like, oh, we're gonna persuade all the people to do these bad things. Like he's not saying that, but like, it doesn't. He's like, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track though. You're not trying to determine whether he's convincing people to do something specific that's bad, right? What you're looking for is something dangerous or problematic in his basic philosophy, right?
Wait, can you say that again?
So yeah, you're not trying to demonstrate that Gorgias is specifically trying to persuade people to do something bad, like go out and steal or go out and murder or anything like that, right? What you're looking for is something that's kind of dangerous or flawed, like in his general philosophy, right?
So can I say that his persuasion is dangerous because
he can use this as him not really
no,
knowing
because you just said it's not about the
using
decision.
his persuasion.
Well, does he consider himself responsible for the decisions people make
No,
based on his teaching?
because they made the decision themselves, but he just persuaded them to do so.
Yeah, and if I would say, look specifically what he says on page 129 about teachers and teachers' responsibilities. Like kind of starting from, and yet Socrates' rhetoric should be used like any other competitive art near the top of the page.
That's good. I can't do that yet.
What's a Pugilist?
Pugilist is a boxer.
Not that everything that he's persuading someone to do is like super wrong or anything like that, but like basically he's saying like, let's just say I told you and persuaded you to go and rob a bank and you did it, you wouldn't be wrong, I would be wrong. But you robbed the bank, so you would be wrong. Like you chose to do the wrong thing. So really you should be the wrong, you should be punished for it because you chose to do it. But since I persuaded you, I would be in the wrong, not you. And that's not right.
Let's argue because I don't.
Okay, and that's part of the trouble with what he says, at least what Plato has Gorgias say on page 129 here, right? Is that Gorgias' actual speech, right, says who is responsible for the crime, the persuader or the persuaded?
Persuader.
The persuader is, right? But then, is a teacher responsible for what their students do with the things he says no, the teacher is not responsible for what the students do with the arts they're taught, right? So, if I teach you something in this class that you go and do something evil with, I honestly don't know what evil you would do with
But how
something.
does that make sense? Isn't that contradictory? Because a teacher is basically a persuader.
Exactly.
So-
That's exactly the point. Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Why
Yeah.
did he say that then?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Teaching does require persuasion, right?
I think he's just all over the place. I don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. Now, so at least Plato has Gorgias say
No, it's
something,
not.
right, that contradicts.
Devil's
his
advocate
thinking
is how like the
contradictory,
argument.
What's that?
Argument for the devil's advocate.
It's contradicting,
Yeah.
right?
And also
Yeah. So that's pointing out something contradictory in Gorgias' own words, right? What I need the devil's advocate to do is try to find evidence that's the opposite of what your group is trying to argue, right? So if the group has decided Gorgias is guilty, the devil's advocate needs to point out evidence that suggests that he isn't, right?
She's doing it.
and vice versa.
Also, whenever I do that understanding of critique or whatever, it's how it can be argument from personal feelings.
Yeah,
So
you
you
can't
can't
do
do
things
things based on feelings, because that will always,
Because of evidence states.
Yeah.
so we can't.
He's not on the account.
Unless a little bit of writing stuff here is made.
I mean, you can.
Did y'all put that he was guilty?
Maybe, maybe not.
Maybe we put both.
But you say both.
Yeah. we put both.
I don't know. Let's argue. Did you put he was guilty?
What
You
did
said
y'all
he was
think?
guilty.
We put innocent.
We put guilty.
Why?
Because you're wrong.
We can't explain.
Because he's very contradictory. He contradicts himself in the two multiple times, and it's like I said before. It just because you persuade someone to do it, that means they're wrong too. If you chose to do it, then you're also in the wrong. It doesn't matter if someone persuaded you or not.
Okay, but it's still that other person's like choice.
Exactly. So if they do the wrong thing, then it's their fault, and he's saying it's not their fault.
So that makes sense.
So that makes him
Oh,
wrong.
shit. Psych. He's guilty.
So before anybody takes any kind of final vote on this, I'm going to give you all a little bit of context here that will help you understand what the dispute is between these two philosophers, right? And what the issue is at stake. So first off, does anybody know what form of government 5th century BCE Athens
Can I
had?
just take a guess?
Well,
You-
I
you
know
can
that
guess.
Dictatorship.
It was not.
The theocracy.
Not a theocracy either. Not
Anarchy.
nor monarchy nor anarchy.
Anarchy.
Democracy.
Yeah, it was yeah. Through process of elimination, that's what we got to, right? So yeah.
Well, in like the introduction, when he's given like, I don't know, context of what's going on, he says that Plato, or he thinks that leaders should decide everything, not by popular vote.
Yeah, Plato did not believe in democracy. Plato thought democracy was a bad thing because it led to people who weren't qualified to make decisions making decisions, right? However, this was the form of government that Plato had to live under, right? And Athenian democracy worked a lot differently from our representative democracy, right? So you didn't like represent people, or you didn't elect people from your part of the city to go represent you in the assembly. If you were a freeborn man who was actually a citizen of Athens, right, born there, then you had a vote on all matters of civic importance, and you had the right to speak in the assembly, right? So teachers of rhetoric became really, really popular and important because they taught people how to win arguments in the assembly. So people like Gorgias had a lot of influence culturally. He belonged to a group of philosophers and teachers of rhetoric called the Sophists. Now, we don't know much for sure about what the Sophists believed because not many of their writings have survived. This Encomium of Helen is just one of the only pieces of Sophist writing that has actually been passed down through history. So most of what we know about the Sophists, we know based on the writings of their enemies, right? People like Plato who opposed them. So what we can determine about them from what we do know is that, by and large, they believed that human beings could not know the absolute truth of anything, right? That our flawed reasoning processes could never actually comprehend absolute truth. So the best we could do is approximate truth through reasoned argument. So Gorgias is representing a philosophical position, right, where absolute truth is not a factor, right, because we can't know what it is. So the best thing you can do is just try to make the best argument you can based on the evidence you have and the needs of your audience, right? Plato's view of reality is different. So Plato uses a story called the Allegory of the Cave as a kind of illustration of what he believes the nature of reality is, right? So imagine that.
I think I read that.
Okay, you're a little bit familiar with this.
I think
Okay,
so.
do you remember how it goes, Carmen?
It's like, it was one class I took, did something brief on it. It was something about how they had these people in the cave, and something about how, I can't remember, something about how the sun and stuff, like.
Okay.
I don't remember everything.
Okay.
I just remember like something brief about it, how they had like people in a cave and they were like trying to test something, some kind of theory about like if they kept them.
Yeah, so
I don't know.
What is on them?
a chain and a collar, right?
Okay.
So essentially what Plato asks you to imagine, right, is that we're all slaves chained up in a cave, right? And that our heads are kind of like forced to look forward by these, collar, by the whatever it is that's chaining us up, right? And all we can see on the back of the cave wall are these great big shadows, right? This is all we know of reality. This is all that we see. Now, unbeknownst to us, right, there's a walkway behind us with a bonfire, and in front of it are people moving various objects back and forth in front of the fire, right? So all that we see are the shadows of these real objects. Now, it might happen that somebody manages to escape from the cave and make it out into the sunlight. Now, because you're only used to sitting in the darkness looking at shadows, at first that sunlight is going to burn the hell out of your eyes, right? It's going to be painful, it's going to be difficult, but once you adjust to it, you understand that the things that you saw in the cave weren't real, they were only shadows. However, when you go back into the cave to try to explain this to the other people who are still chained up there, they treat you like you're crazy, and then ignore you and start going back to talking about which shadows they like best, right? So the shadows represent the world of belief and opinion.
Instead of reality, right?
What's that?
I said instead of reality.
Instead of reality. Yeah, reality is what's outside the cave. Right? This higher realm of ideas that everything in the physical world is just an imitation of. And Plato's philosophy is really big on this idea of imitation, right? That everything in the physical world is just an inferior copy of some idea, right? So for example, like this table. We can make a table because we have some idea of what a table should be and what it should look like, right? So any table we make in the real world is just an imitation of that idea. And just about every art or science has both its real nature and its false nature, right? So for example, medicine Plato compares to cookery, right? One actually deals with the health of the body, the other just tries to please the tongue, right? He opposes gymnastic, or kind of exercise to cosmetics, right? One actually makes the body fit and beautiful, and the other simply covers up imperfections, right? Philosophy's false counterpart for Plato is rhetoric, because philosophy tries to get at the truth, while rhetoric just tries to create belief, right? And that's something that Gorgias admits at one point in the dialogue here with Socrates, right? Is that all he can really do is create belief about what's right and wrong. He can't actually instruct people on what is right and wrong.
And Socrates was Plato's mentor, right?
Yeah, Socrates was Plato's teacher, yes. And you know, the slightly ironic thing about the accusation I put on the board here is that that's basically what Socrates himself was eventually accused of and executed for, as a corrupter of the youth. And the Assembly of Athens voted to make him drink a concoction of hemlock.
What is
So that he did. Hemlock is it's a poisonous plant, poisonous berries, yeah. So yeah, he was ordered to commit suicide by the state.
Oh, okay.
Ostensibly for being a corrupter of the youth, but probably for having spent decades just being annoying to any citizen of Athens who happened to cross his path. All right, so what did you all come up with here? What is your determined? I'll give you a minute to make your final decisions here, and decide whether you want to convict or acquit Gorgias.
We put that he was guilty.
Okay.
Okay.
And I put I compared the power of the Lord to drugs and magic from the speech part.
Okay.
Because he used it as a controlling aspect.
Uh-huh.
And then in this, the
Rhetorician.
Yep.
Rhetorician.
In the
yes.
position, the rhetorician would win by the people's choice because of his persuasion that he uses to control the tool.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the rhetorician can get his way
Yeah.
without actually having to know anything about what he's arguing about. Okay. What have you got here, Carmen?
The scribe said
Okay.
he is guilty. He is arguing that no matter if it is right or wrong, one may persuade one to do something, and whether or not it is just or unjust for them to do it, it is not them who is in the wrong, but rather the persuader. Just like Helen was not guilty because she was persuaded. However, Gorgias contradicts himself in his debate with Socrates.
Socrates. Yep, Socrates.
Yeah. Okay, it's what?
Socrates, yep.
Socrates, saying that a teacher is not responsible for what she teaches her students and what they do with what they learn, even though a teacher is a type of persuader. He contradicts himself and teaches whether right or wrong if one can convince someone to do it. It is therefore right. And when you want a country to abide by certain laws created, this is a very dangerous way of teaching for any law can be persuaded to be right or wrong. So basically, it's not really real. It's false.
Okay.
Beliefs.
Yeah. So is there anybody who thought that Gorgias should be acquitted?
Our devils
Okay. What have you anything to say in Gorgias' defense?
But on page 120 to 129, I have with in his argument of saying basically that just because of the original teachings of rhetoric is for good use, so the person that I guess receives it or learns it, what they do with it is on them. So it's not the teacher's fault for teaching rhetoric.
Okay.
It's based off of it's the person that I guess uses it for bad.
Okay, so you are agreeing with Gorgias's assertion that essentially rhetoric is it's a tool.
Yeah,
It's a skill. It's morally neutral, and it's the good or bad character of whoever's using it. Okay, so what's your final vote here? Who votes guilty? Okay, everybody except Rendaria. All right, Gorgias is declared exiled. So I have reading questions for you here for the Seneca for next time. And then you are free to go.